I have this bad habit when it comes to consuming media where when I find a favorite character or faction, it's always going to be one with very little screen time to their name, but a lot of potential. And if you've seen the thumbnail, you already know what I'm talking about. This episode is about the Grey Knights and the Eldar. Now, for those who might not be familiar or need a refresher, considering they barely ever get mentioned, the Grey Knights are a special order of space marines who have gene seed from the Emperor himself and are located on Saturn's moon of Titan. What they specialize in is killing demons and nothing else. Not to say they can't kill anything else, they can kill everything, but demons are their forte, all the way down to the war gear they have, which often contains the bones of Imperial Saints and is heavily psi-active, because all of them have their psychic potential unlocked, and essentially each individual Grey Knight can function like a librarian, even better actually. Created at the end of the Horus Heresy by none other than Malcador the Sigillite from the Knights Errant he had gathered from many of the legions that had turned traitor, the Grey Knight's existence is kept an absolute secret from the rest of the Imperium under pain of death. Anyone who finds out about them or could have possibly seen one is often executed, if not mind-wiped. This policy actually goes so far as to apply to other Space Marine chapters, though Space Marines are not really executed because that is seen as a huge waste and as such are just mind-wiped if they happen to see a Grey Knight in battle, or learn of them some way. Now, for this reason, the Grey Knights are not well known, obviously, but they're also not well liked, even among the people who do know of them. For example, the Space Wolves. For those of you who have heard the Stringstorm song, because let's be honest, that's how you know about this, there was an incident where the demon Primarch Angron appeared during one of the wars for Armageddon, and the Grey Knights showed up to stop him, which they were successful at. But since demons had showed up on the planet, and the Grey Knights had also been present, what the Inquisition had decided to do was sterilize everyone who had been on the planet and force them into work camps while they went about getting colony ships to repopulate the planet with a quote-unquote untainted population. The Space Wolves found this to be unacceptable, refusing outright to abandon the people they had fought alongside and died to save be treated this way. And that's understandable. This would lead to open conflict between not just the Grey Knights, but the entire Inquisition, who the Grey Knights are a part of. They're considered the Chamber Militant of the Ordo Malleus, or Demon Hunters, against the Space Wolves, leading to a very embarrassing period of internecine fighting known as the Months of Shame. As you can see, the Grey Knights are consumed and geared for this one specific thing: killing demons. It is what they do, it is their raison d'etre, and by the Emperor, they are good at it. But it doesn't really make for interesting characterization, and as such, there's not a lot going on with them, especially when any characters that fight alongside them are probably gonna die. So, factoring all this in, the drive to fight demons at all costs, the disregard for human life, the narrative stuntedness, it kind of stands to reason in a weird way that they would get along with the Eldar of all people so well. Honestly, I wish this was a plot point touched on more, because it would go a long way in making both the Grey Knights and the Eldar way more interesting and engaging to read about. That's so cool to me. And as per usual, I have some excerpts about this. Let me get into these because they're really cool. It was difficult to track all of them as they spread out, securing the ruined dome. Some of the more twitchy battle brothers started to edge into a defensive formation, but Pelenas waved them back. With his blade rested upon the deck, he stood in his scarred Terminator battleplate, ready to receive the Xenos delegation. There were 5 of them in all, bedecked in long, flowing robes and crystalline hoods. They strode into the hall, flanked by a dozen more Guardian warriors armed with projectile rifles. Pelenas noted the runic talismans, the gemstones and intricate psi webbing that festooned the seer's panoply. Though he did not doubt their mastery was great, they put him in mind of nothing more than primitive totem shamans. They regarded him with the cold, blue glare of their faceless masks as they approached. The leading seer, a particularly lithe creature carrying a great staff that struck the deck noisily with every 5th step he took, pointed at Pelenas with a slender finger.
"Your presence here is a travesty, human,"
he uttered in harshly accented but flawless Gothic.
"You trespass upon our domain, the lost souls of Craftworld Malantai. After the doom that has already been heaped upon them, how much more must they suffer at the hands of your ignoble breed?"
The delegation drew up before the purifiers, surrounded by their guardians. Even armed for war, the Eldar were as consumptive children before the hulking space marines. Pelenas removed his helm and handed it off to one of his brothers.
I am Brother Captain Ornheim Pelinas of the Grey Knights chapter Adeptus Astartes,
he said.
and I must beg your worthy forgiveness, for I have no quarrel with your kind, Zeno, and no servant of the Imperium knows the horrors of the warp better than the Battle Brothers of Titan.
Planting his blade before him, he and the Purifiers knelt as one in supplication before the startled Seer Council. For a long while, the hall was utterly silent. The captain drew a simple cloth bag from his belt and held it out before him. It rattled with the handful of plucked Eldar soul stones that it contained, those that Pelinas had personally wrested from the hungry grasp of the warp beasts that had overrun Malantai.
As was our message to you, we traced our demonic enemies to this place, though I fear we arrived too late to save all the imprisoned spirits of your kinsmen. Our foe is vanquished for now, but this is your holy ground, and we have indeed besmirched it with our presence. I would not sully it further by leaving it unattended and open to the depredations of those that wait beyond.
The Eldar were clearly staggered, though their discipline was enough that they managed to remain quietly aloof in spite of it. An attendant seer stepped forward and took the stones from Pelinas, with a reverential nod, which the captain returned. The leader of the delegation slid back his featureless visor and bid the Grey Knights to rise.
Forgive me, Pelinas of Titan. We are unused to seeing your kind, unless it be upon the field of war. The respect you do us here is great, and will not be forgotten by the living or the dead.
He gestured to his guardians, who parted to clear the way to the void locks.
You will be accorded safe travel to your starship, and an escort from this system. As our honored guests, if there's anything else you would have in return for this kindness, name it now.
Pelinas drew a long, calming breath. When he spoke again, his voice was edged with bitterness.
There is nothing you can offer us, Zeno, except to know that we suffered greatly in preserving this place for you. The most noble of our number is fallen. He took his proffered helm and gazed into its dark retinal lenses. If you would praise the architect of Malantai's deliverance, then remember he who gave his life most selflessly to defend it. He martyred himself so that I, might live to fight on against the demon's spawn.
The seer nodded.
So shall it be. This warrior shall be noted in the annals of my people.
From the short story, The Ghost Halls by L.J. Goulding, 2013. Now, yeah, this does have some of the hallmarks of one of the older pieces of lore, where things like that were a little more acceptable to throw around. Like, something like this probably would never be written in the 2020s, but this sort of reinforces my feeling that the early 2000s to early 2010s was sort of like a golden age for 40K lore and 40K writing. I don't know, things just had a different vibe back then that I find a lot more interesting and a lot more fun. And speaking of fun, there is another excerpt, and this one is really cool, especially to me of all people. From the Black Crusade Core Rulebook 2011. Elegant landing craft descended to the surface, distorting troops of brightly hued warriors whose grinning masks mocked those they slew. None could stand against the warrior dancers, or their allies. It is said that amongst the warriors strode 4 knights clad in silver armor. Even the most hardened Chaos Reaver crumbled against the fury of their bolt rounds, or died from the reaping strikes of their swords and halberds. So yeah, that's Grey Knights fighting alongside Eldar Harlequins, more specifically, hitching a ride in their transport. What I want to know is, how did that arrangement come about? Was this pre-planned? Was there some kind of meeting? Or did a bunch of Harlequins just see some Grey Knights and say, hey, get in, Monkai, we're going to be fighting Chaos Space Marines? Because that is what's happening in this excerpt. They're actually fighting together on a small ruined planet in an area of space called the Screaming Vortex, called Sackgrave. And a lot of people do tend to forget that a lot of Chaos Space Marines outside the Eye of Terror do function effectively as pirates and raiders, operating out of small bases. Which, again, is another thing I wish would be touched on more in the lore, because Chaos Space Marines tend to get a little boring with just, Dark Gods, Dark Gods, Dark Gods, Black Legion, Black Legion, Black Legion, destroy the Imperium, which is why people think the Red Corsairs are so cool, and the Alpha Legion in the 41st Millennium is so cool, and people still love the Night Lords so much, because they're doing their own thing, kind of. It's just more interesting than all the overarching battle of fates between the ruinous powers and the Imperium. And alongside this, there is also the fact that Grey Knights and Eldar and Harlequins all did fight side by side when they were trying to get a resurrected Guilliman to Terra, but were captured by Chaos Space Marines and demons and had to help fight them off. That, of course, is from The Gathering Storm Part 3, Rise of the Primarch, and it doesn't really hit the same way as the other two instances. It's more so just same place, same time sort of thing, but I think it was worth mentioning. If anyone knows any other instances of Eldar and Grey Knights fighting alongside each other, please let me know in the comments, because it's one of those things that just happens very rarely, but is really interesting when it does. But what do you guys think? Do you think it's cool that the Grey Knights fight alongside Eldar and Harlequins, or do you think it's just sort of trite and not really something that should be touched on? Do you like the Grey Knights as more of a very aloof and mysterious organization? I'd love to hear about it in the comments below, and until then, I'll see you in the next video.